Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really incredible set of frameworks for surviving extreme chaos. These are drawn directly from Michael K. Bender's book, The Clarity to Live Well. You know, we all face pressure, confusion, and just overwhelming demands on a daily basis. But Michael's hard-won lessons, they take on a completely different weight when you realize exactly where their ultimate test came from. So let's unpack this, starting with a moment that changed absolutely everything for him. Imagine sitting in a stark, fluorescent-lit doctor's office at age 65 and hearing the words that split your life into a before and after. For Michael, that was a diagnosis of metastatic prostate cancer. And as if that wasn't terrifying enough, literally 2 weeks later, a cardiologist diagnosed him with severe cardiovascular disease. He was given just 18 to 36 months to live. Suddenly, the 40 years of strategic frameworks he developed as a diplomat and a business executive, they weren't just abstract theories anymore. They were literal survival skills. And spoiler alert here, those exact skills helped him not just survive, but actually thrive well into his late 70s. So let's look at the very first hurdle he had to overcome, because it's one we actually all face every single day. Part 1, the crisis of noise, the invisible enemy. To navigate any high-stakes crisis, or honestly, even just everyday life, we have to confront this invisible enemy. But noise isn't just the constant pinging of your emails and notifications. I mean, that's just the external noise. It's also the massive emotional overwhelm that floods us. And perhaps most dangerously, it's our internal stories. You know, those false assumptions that masquerade as wisdom in our heads. Michael shares a really powerful anecdote about this. He was in the Middle East negotiating a high-stakes trade deal for an American company. Out of nowhere, the minister across the table started venting about completely unrelated geopolitical grievances. Michael felt the heat rising in his chest. His internal noise was absolutely screaming at him to defend his country, to fight back. But he recognized that his internal defensiveness would ruin the whole deal. So he bit his tongue, literally pressed it against the roof of his mouth to stay quiet, and eventually steered the conversation right back to the debt. He got the company paid, all because he refused to let his internal noise take the wheel. And that story brilliantly illustrates our core challenge. The goal here isn't to just silence the entire world. I mean, let's face it, that's impossible. The goal is to actively filter the crucial signal, the actual information that matters, from the deceptive noise of distraction, false urgency, and static. If you can't tell the difference between the two, you simply can't navigate. But that begs the question, why is it so incredibly hard to tell them apart? Well, that brings us to part 2, your brain under pressure, the neuroscience of panic. Why is distinguishing signal from noise so difficult? Well, we're basically walking around with ancient neural architecture that was designed for escaping literal predators. When your amygdala, which is your brain's alarm system, detects a threat, it doesn't just pause and ask for context. No, it immediately floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol and essentially pulls your rational thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, completely offline. Your amygdala literally cannot tell the difference between a physical predator in the wild and a harsh, passive-aggressive comment from your boss in a meeting. It treats both of them as life-or-death emergencies. And when this confusion and panic sets in, we tend to default to some really automatic, unhelpful responses. We freeze, right? Just paralyzed, waiting for a certainty that is never actually going to arrive. Or we flee, procrastinating or just numbing the discomfort. Or we fight, reacting aggressively and doubling down on bad assumptions. So the absolutely crucial point here is that clear thinkers must deliberately train themselves to use a fourth response. Investigate. Instead of panicking at the confusion, you lean into it. You ask, okay, what am I missing here? But to investigate effectively, you kind of need to know when you have enough information to actually make a move. Which leads us to part 3, the 80% rule, conquering the paralysis of perfection. Waiting around for perfect information might feel like the responsible thing to do, but honestly, it's usually just fear dressed up as prudence. On the flip side, rushing into action blindly is just reckless impulsivity. So where is the sweet spot? It's 80%. This is your practical, everyday threshold for gathering enough information to decide responsibly. Because let's be real, you will never, ever have 100% certainty. Whether you're in high-level diplomacy, running a business, or facing a dual medical crisis like Michael, perfect information is a complete myth. You just need enough clarity to see the terrain and make a reasoned call. Let's break down how this actually works as an actionable framework. So how do you know when you've hit your 80%? You just ask yourself these 3 simple questions. First, do I understand the actual major risks? Second, have I identified the key variables and how they interact with each other? And third, and I think this is the big one, Am I waiting for decision-critical details or just nice-to-know, perfect details? If you are just endlessly scrolling for one more opinion that isn't going to change your fundamental decision, you are stuck in the waiting trap. Hit your 80%, make the decision, and just stay flexible enough to course correct along the way. All right, part 4, the power of the pause, the gateway to clarity. Here's the catch. Even if you understand the 80% rule perfectly, you can't execute it if you're emotionally hijacked. So we need to shift to what is arguably the most vital tool in this entire framework. It's the bridge between knowing what to do and actually doing it, the deliberate pause. Stimulus, pause, response. When something triggers you, taking a deliberate break of just 3 to 10 seconds changes the entire game. It lowers your heart rate. It lets that flood of adrenaline fade. And most importantly, it gives your prefrontal cortex the actual time it needs to boot back online so you can think instead of just blindly reacting. This quote from Viktor Frankl just anchors the concept so beautifully. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. Let me share a story from the source material that shows exactly what happens when we ignore this space. Michael was in Saudi Arabia with a diplomatic colleague, pitching a proposal. The official politely but indirectly signaled that it wasn't going to work out. Instead of pausing to just read the room and recalibrate, Michael's colleague let his frustration totally drive his response. He interrupted, aggressively demanded an immediate commitment, and instantly killed the entire deal. The official just leaned back, and it was over. He couldn't find that space between stimulus and response, and it cost them everything. Part 5. Thinking in layers, seeing beneath the surface. Once you master that pause, you unlock the ability to diagnose really complex problems properly by avoiding linear surface-level thinking. And this is how you do it, the 5-layer framework. The problem is, most people stop at layer 1. Michael talks about a Midwest regional manager whose sales had suddenly dropped by 30%. The surface solution, layer 1, was obvious. He lost his edge, he needs to be fired. But by pausing and looking much deeper, Michael looked at layer 4, the system. He realized the company had actually changed its incentive structure, and they were accidentally punishing this manager for market shifts that were completely out of his control. By addressing the system rather than just firing the guy, the whole region recovered. The takeaway, if you don't look past the surface, you're going to constantly solve the wrong problems. Now, to dig through those layers, you need really good strategic questions. Michael was once sitting in this polished, high-end corporate boardroom in Kuwait. A presenter was up there showing these massive, incredible revenue projections, and everyone around the table was just nodding along. But Michael noticed a massive, hidden assumption baked into the numbers. So he simply asked, what happens if the government changes the regulations? And the room just went completely quiet. The presenter didn't know. Nobody in the room knew. That single, well-placed probing question didn't just seek data. It completely stopped the room's blind reactive momentum. It revealed a catastrophic, unexamined risk and created the actual space for real understanding, allowing them to restructure the deal safely. You see, the person who asks the best questions controls the conversation, not through dominance, but through pure clarity. Which brings us to our final section, part 6, Mastering Emotional Clarity, the Final Resolution. Here is the ultimate truth of this entire framework. The 80% rule, the pause, the layered thinking, it all collapses under extreme panic unless you have emotional clarity. You absolutely have to know the difference between your intuition and your anxiety. Intuition is grounded, it's calm, it's specific, and it gives you direction. Anxiety is scattered, it's vague, and it loudly demands that you do something right now just to relieve the discomfort. When Michael was hit with his simultaneous cancer and heart disease diagnoses, the medical system was pushing him in totally conflicting directions. He was terrified. His framework started to collapse, but his wife, Judah, provided the calm anchoring he desperately needed. She helped him pause. She helped him separate his profound anxiety from his actual deep-down intuition. And because he was able to achieve that emotional clarity, he saw the systemic reality of his situation. He needed to pursue incredibly aggressive simultaneous treatments to survive. And against all odds, it worked. So I want to leave you with this final thought. In a noisy, chaotic world, clarity is not just some luxury, it's a literal survival skill. It requires actively filtering the noise, embracing that 80% role, holding your ground in the pause, and always looking beneath the surface. I challenge you to apply this kind of emotional clarity to your own life today. Think about the problem that's stressing you out the most right now. Take a deliberate pause and ask yourself this provocative question. What is the real question you are trying to answer right now? Cut through your internal noise, find your signal, and then take action.